Hey, this is John. Welcome back to Modern Old School Developer. So in the last episode, I said that we were done. So what are we doing here? Well, the application is complete. There's no new functionality to show off or build. And although I made a few minor tweaks between the last episode and now, that's not what I'm here to discuss. Rather, I'm here to focus on something that we didn't do in the entire series: automated testing. There are no tests for anything in this application, and that's not something you would do in any production application. And if I'm going to show off how I built this end to end, I should add tests to it as well. So let's start doing that with the front end. So the first thing I want to do is make a few refactors to our application, which will make it easier to test things later on. So I'm first going to move our provider from app.tsx to index.tsx. This isn't going to make any functional changes to our application. It'll simply make it easier for us to test things with our Redux store later on. So let's just cut a few of these things from place to place. And I think all that should be good. Our provider is now in index, still wrapped around our application, so all of our components beneath that still have access to our store. Next, in our store.ts folder file, we might want to get a clean copy of our store. We're exporting a singular store right now, and that means if we make changes during a test, we might want to erase those changes before we continue. So let's make it easier to get a clean copy of our store by changing this to a function. We'll call it createNewStore, and the function simply returns our configure store. Then, to keep everything working the same way, we'll say store equals createNewStore. And there we go. Again, no functional changes to our application. This is just to make it easier to test things later on. All right, next I want to set up a testing library. We've got the testing library for React that came with Create React App. We're going to make a few tweaks with it so that we can wrap our components in our provider. This will let us test different pieces of our application and have our Redux provider anywhere inside there, which is why I moved the provider from app to index. So over in source, let's make a new file, testutils.tsx, and make sure the extension is either TSX or JSX. It won't work if it's TS or JS. All right, so what are we going to put in here? Well, first I want to get the provider from React Redux. I also want to get a few of the functions from our testing library. We're going to use render and render options, and this is from testing library/React. Next, I want to be able to create new store, so we'll import that from our store. And now I want to make a wrapper component. So I'm going to call it wrapper. This is a React functional component. This is so I don't have to type the children. All right, and it's going to return a provider from Redux. The store is going to be create new store, and then we'll simply put the children underneath that. This will let us use Redux to test any component in our application. We won't have to import the entire application, which could be very heavy in a big application. It's not really for ours. It'd be fine to do it for the whole application, but in a real application, you would definitely need to test smaller pieces of your app, not the entire thing. So next, I see we've got this render function. We use that to render our components, like our wrapper, and then test what happened inside that rendered component. So to do that, we'd like to render this wrapper component every time so that we always have our Redux store, because our Redux store needs to be for everything. So let's make a custom render function, const custom render, and this is going to be a function which takes a user interface element, which is a react.react element, and it takes options, which are optional, and we're going to omit from render options the wrapper, and And that is all of our parameters. So our function is going to return their render function with UI, but we're going to have our wrapper component be wrapper. And then we'll pass whatever other options we might use, which realistically we're not going to be doing right now, but we may in the future. All right, that should be good for that. So we're getting most of our testing functions from this library, but I want to be able to use our custom render and everything else right from here. So to do that, we're going to export everything from testing library React. This will let us import all the functions we want right from here. And we're going to change the name of that custom render function. We'll export that, but we're going to export it as render to pretend we're simply using the standard testing library for React. We'll just simply have our wrapper component, but it won't look any different if we were testing in some other way without Redux. And this way, we wouldn't have to change our test if we decided to not use Redux in the future. All right, that should be good for our test utilities. So what do we need to do to make some actual tests now? Well, over in README, I've got a few suggestions for tests we might want to do. So we'll need to render the movie list and see if we get a list of movies. So how do we do that? Let's go into our components and go into movie list. And we should be able to render this, except it's using the format context. That's a problem. All of the things in our main page use this same format context. So if we don't have that, we're not going to be able to render this movie list component. So instead, I think we should render the main page because this will have our component, our format context, and all of the pieces of this form. And we can test them all at the same time. So let's do that instead. So to set up a test, we need to make a new file. That file will be called the same thing as your component, so main page in this case, but we'll say .test.tsx. So the test is important and tsx is important. Make sure it matches the extension on your main page. All right, so let's go over to our main page test file and let's import a few things. First, I want to import from the testing library, from just DOM, I want to extend expect. This is going to allow us some additional functionality on the expect function we're going to use to check to see what happened in our rendered element. We'll see how that works in a minute. Next, I want to import things from our testing library. We're going to import our custom render function and screen, and we'll see what screen does shortly. And we're going to import that from test utilities rather than from testing library / React. Because remember, we exported everything from testing library React in test utilities. So although we don't have screen, it's actually coming from testing library React. All right, now that we have that, let's also import our main page component so we can render that. And now let's go set up our first test. So the first thing we'll do is we'll say we're going to describe our test. And we'll say test main page. Second argument is going to be a function. So let's make one of those. And inside here, we'll say what we're going to do. So what I want to do is I want to render the main page and see if it works. So why don't we do that? Let's say render main page. And let's see what happens if we run this test. So let's open up our terminal. And let's go do, you can either do npm run test or simply npm t. Either one is equivalent. So if we run that, what is it going to do? Hey, it failed. That's sad. I thought it would. Your test suite must contain at least one test. Ah, we forgot to actually make a test. That's no good. All right, I forgot something. I made a couple changes here. Shouldn't have done that. All right, it. So you can either run test or you can write it. They're the same function, just aliased. I like it better because it allows more easy to read flow. So I'm going to say renders the main page without errors. All right, and then the next argument is a function, and all we have to do is move that render inside here, and hopefully that will work now. So let's go back to our console. There we go. Renders the main page without errors. And that looks pretty good. So what if we had done main page? Hey, there is no such thing as a main page, so our test appears to be working. So how can we be sure of that? Well, let's do a screen.debug and see what the screen debug says. Hey, there we go. So it doesn't want you to use screen debug in normal testing, but we can do this temporarily. And what it's going to do is it's going to log the HTML that it rendered. So here is everything it found. We've got loading elements for selected and actors, and all of our form components here are still loading. Our movies are loading. So yeah, there we go. We definitely got our component. Cool. So let's make something slightly more useful. Let's get rid of this debug. And let's say I wanted to test that, what was that test I said I wanted to do? Getting the list of movies. Okay, let's see if it does that. So let's go to our browser. And over here, I want to know something that's over here. So I've got this extension called the Testing Playground. And you can get that for Firefox or Chrome. And it is helpful when using testing library. So in our testing playground, we can go over here and look for an element. And then if we highlight it, it will tell you a suggested query. A suggested query is a function we can use on the screen element to find something on the screen. So if I wanted to see if this movie was being rendered, I might do something like this, screen.getByRole option, and the name is a regular expression, Catwoman Halle Berry MP4. And it's using the case-insensitive match. So let's just go ahead and copy this, and let's go back into our test, and let's say that this happened. So if I get by role, so why don't we do element, and let's do a console.log of element, and see what it thinks is there. So let's go back to our thing, and our test failed. Sad. So what happened here? Let's scroll up a little bit. Unable to find an accessible element with the role option and name Catwoman Halle Berry. And you can see our movie list says loading. Well, that's probably the issue. We tried to load things and we hadn't given it enough time yet. Okay. That's fine. Let's give it some more time. How do we do that? How do we wait for it to find the element? Well, getByRole checks for the element, and if it doesn't find it, it throws an exception. So we can change that to findByRole. And if we findByRole, we can wait for it. So we can use a wait if we change our function to async. So what this will do is it will check for the element. If it doesn't find it, it'll wait 50 milliseconds. It will keep waiting until 1 second has passed, at which point it gives up and produces an error. That's the default behavior. You can tweak those values, but they'll be good enough for us right now. So let's see if that works. Save that and go back. It's rerunning the test, and our test still failed. Well, that's no fun. What happened there? Well, if we scroll up, oh, all kinds of errors. Error. Cross-origin, localhost forbidden. We're no longer coming from localhost port 3000. We're coming from just localhost. Well, that's a problem. Well, okay, let's go change our backend real quick. It's not the correct solution. I'll show you that in a minute. But let's just change our backend to see what would happen. So let's go over here to our backend, which is somewhere in here. In main.py, here is our middleware. So here is our regex we're matching. So we're coming from HTTP localhost, but I don't want it to be port 3000. So let's put that in here and put that there. And let's say that's optional. We'll make that a non-capturing group. And so the port is now completely optional. If you're coming from localhost of any port, localhost on the default port 80, or port 3009, it should be okay now. We'll hit save, and we have restart our application. So back in our testing, we can hit W to get some more things, and we can hit A to rerun all of our tests. So what happens now? Hey, our test passed. Hooray! And we have this object, which has all kinds of stuff on I don't care about, but the important thing is our object is there. However, this is not the correct solution. It's fine, and you could do this, but we shouldn't be testing against our actual backend. For one thing, our backend might be mission critical, and we don't want to be playing around with it. Secondly, we can't always be sure that our backend will return all possible cases. We might want to test if the front end handles errors from the backend properly. And what if the backend isn't having errors right now? I can't just fill up a disk or do something to make it have an error. So rather than doing that, we need to mock the backend. In other words, set up a fake backend which will return results to our front end. So how do we do that? To set up a mock endpoint, we are going to use mock service worker, and we can install that with npm install --B MSW. All right, now that we have that library, let's go make some use of it. So what are we going to do over here? First, we'll need to import some things from our new library. We're just going to mock a REST endpoint, so we'll import REST from MSW, and we're going to import setup server from MSW node. All right, and now we need to build a server. Let's go make one of those. So we'll start by saying const server equals setup server. It's a function which takes an array of endpoints. You can just comma separate them. So we're going to say rest.get, and I want to get the movies, so it's /movies. And then the second argument to this function is another function, which has a request, a response, and a context parameter. So let's go make this function. All we have to do is return our response. And let's say we're going to return a JSON response. And our movies endpoint returns a list of movie file types. So that is an array of objects with IDs and file names. So we'll give it Aladdin. And we'll give it Beauty and the Beast. All right, there we go. We have our mocked endpoint. So how do we actually make it take use of this? Well, all we have to do is set it up to actually run. So the first thing we're going to do is say, I want this to run before any of our tests, or before all of our tests. So we have a function called before all. It takes a function, and all I need to do right now is start the server. So server, listen please. Now when we're done, so after all, we will make another function that is server.close. All right, there we go. So before we run our test, we'll start our server. When we're done, we will stop our server. All right, so this should work now, right? Let's see. And our test, hey, it passed. Cool. And we found Catwoman. We found Catwoman. That wasn't part of our mock data. Did I add Catwoman up here? No, I did not. So how did it find that? Well, the answer is we are not mocking things properly. If we scroll up some, you will see lots of warnings. Captured a request without a matching request handler. And we have one for studios and series and movies. But didn't we mock the movie endpoint? I remember making one. Yeah, it's right here. What gives? We mocked the relative path /movies. We did not mock http://localhost port 8000 /movies. And we need to do that. It has to be specific. Right now, it just thinks it's localhost slash movies. That's what we're getting right now, which is not what we want. So let's make a function which will help us wrap our endpoints. How do we do that? Let's say const backend equals a function which takes a path, which is a string, and it's going to return a string constructed from a URL of the path and the base URL. So the base URL is going to be React App Backend. We do have access to that here, and we'll convert that to a string. There we go. There's our backend. And now we can wrap this with our backend, and hopefully that works. Let's go see if it did. So it failed. It failed to find Catwoman. Hey, perfect. It shouldn't have found Catwoman. What did it find? Let's scroll up here, way up to the top, and we see Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. Perfect. That's what I expect to see. So let's go down here and look for one of those then. Let's just look for Beauty and the Beast. And rather than use a regex, I'm going to use an exact match. So let's say the name is Beauty and the Beast. And we go down here and it failed again. Why did it fail now? Because we're using an exact match. The name, the entire text has to match verbatim here. If I add the .mp4, it should work now. And you see our test does pass. So if you have an exact string you want to match, you can do it like this. If you want to match it with a regular expression, you can do this. And if you want to be case sensitive, you can add the I, and that's fine too. Those are 3 ways to match. So if I took this off and did a case sensitive string match, this should still work. And you can see it still passes. We got Beauty and the Beast on MP4, which is what we had, but we matched it with a regular expression for part of the string. I'm going to go ahead and use the exact match, but you can use whatever you like. So I'll just copy that from right up here, and there we go. We do have a lot of other warnings still. All of the other endpoints that main page is getting, like categories and actors, are still not mocked properly. We want to make sure we are mocking all of our endpoints. So let me go import some data real quick to make that work. All right, so let's make another test. Let's say that we wanted to look for an actor in our available actors list. How can we do that? Well, it's pretty similar actually, but why don't we use the expect syntax instead? Because we don't need this element. We just want it to be in the document. So let's change this and let's use expect. And we're going to expect whatever we get back from here to be in the document. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do things similar for everything else. So let's copy this. And let's say that I want an option. And this time my option is going to be Elijah Wood. And if I hit save now, go back to our console, it runs our test, and we have 1 passed. We didn't get any errors, but I thought there'd be 2 tests passed. Well, our test is this, right here. So neither of these failed, so our test didn't fail. That's not quite accurate. We're not rendering the main page without errors. We're actually checking that the main page renders and that we can find Beauty and the Beast. So let's make some more tests. We can make more functions over here. So why don't we close the function right here, and let's say it loads the movies into the movie list. We'll make a new async function, and we'll move this up here. There we go. This one doesn't need to be async anymore. We can get rid of that async there. And then we'll say it does this, but we'll have this expect instead. And then this should be an async, but this time it is loads the actors into the actor selector. So is that right? Looks correct. Let's see if it works. And we go down here and we've got some failures. What happened there? We rendered the main page, but we didn't load our movies or load the actors? What happened there? Unable to find role option. That's weird. Didn't we have that before? Well, okay, why don't we do a screen.debug in one of these? What do we get out of this? All right, one passed, one failed, and our screen debug is nowhere to be found. Well, actually, that's because we threw an exception there. So we didn't get past this line here. This expect, threw an exception, and we didn't get past that. So let's take that off for a second, and let's just await this, and then let's see if we can do a screen debug. All right, it failed, and I still don't see my console log. What's going on there? And the answer is, we didn't render this over here. We only did it over here. That's right. We have only rendered our main page in this one test. Everywhere else has a blank screen. So it's never going to find something. There's nothing to find in here. So what are we going to do about that? Let's move that expect back. Take out our console log, which isn't going to work anyway. And let's change this. Let's say that I want to do something before every test. I'm testing the main page, so we better render the page. So let's say before each test takes a function, and I want to do this. I want to render the main page. We can get rid of this. We have one less test, but we'll be implicitly testing we have the main page in everything right here. All right, so if we hit save now, and we go back in there, do our test pass? Hey, it does. Loaded our movies, loaded our actors. Are we sure we got our actors? Let's just mess up his name real quick. Let's say Elijah Wood. Aha, it failed. Perfect. Just what I wanted to see. There is no Elijah Wood in the document. There's only Elijah Wood. And that should be good for now. All right, well, that is the basics of our testing process. We will make some tests, we will render some things, we will check they're in the document, and when we need to get data back from the back end, we will mock that with mock service worker. I hope that you have enjoyed today's episode. Hope that it's been helpful or enlightening in some way. If it has, hey, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, help the channel grow. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.